Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Basic Hebrew on this fifth day of February 2023. And so we have had a question come up here with respect to Hebrew numbers. Is there a difference between the Hebrew values of letters and Hebrew words for ordinal and cardinal numbers? Are the Hebrew values of letters used for anything like math very similar to Roman numerals, or are they simply used for alphabetizing? So the question here is arising from this particular comparison here. You can see as we look through the alphabet that each of the letters has a numeric value. So thus the Aleph would represent 1, Beth 2, Gimel 3, Daleth 4, Hey 5, Wow 6, and so on. And then all the way up to 10, and then you get to Kaf, and then we start counting by tens, 20, 30, 40. And then you get down to the Kof, and that's when we have 100. And so thus these letters then can be used to stand for a number. And so just like we could write out the word 11 in English, or I could also go ahead and just say, or I could use numbers and say 11. So too, in Hebrew, you could go ahead and use, as you can see here, if I come back over here, for the number 11, you have Achad, Asar, which would be 1 and 10. So I could go ahead then and write out Achad, Asar, and that would be 11, or I could also write Aleph, Yod, and that too would be 11. And so this then would be a shorthand way of representing the name of the number. So this would be a shorthand way of representing Achad Asar, just as this as well is a shorthand way of representing 11.
But they would do it. They would do it Yod Aleph.
Sure.
Which they would never do.
Yes, exactly, because that would then be an abbreviation. But that would be kind of an idea there. And you can see just coming back over to wine green, and I'll bring up the numbers here. Okay, so there are the numbers, and then that's not going on. There we go. So as you can see, if we come on down here further into wine green, and so thus compound numbers are represented thus: Yod Aleph 11, and then Yod Beth 12, Yod Gimel 13, and so forth. And so basically all those letters it's just a shorthand way of representing the spelled out numbers. Now, as far as mathematics are concerned, I'm not familiar with Hebrew arithmetic. Are you, sir?
The only thing that we really see in the scriptures is that when they talk about a very large number, they'll say something like Rav Ravan, multitude, which is a multiple of something. But the Hebrew numbering system was on a base 10, as you can see, because you go Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Hey, Waw, Zayin, Chet, Teth, Yod. At Yod, when you get to 10, The very next thing, Yod, and then you go to Kaf, and then Lamed, Mem, and all of these. The very next number is, since Yod is 10, the next number is, or the next letter is 20. Next is 30. Next is 40, and so forth. And then they go up to 90, and then to 100. Then they go 200, and at each 10, if you will, they jump up again to the next thing. They jump by hundreds. And you can see that in the list that she's got there: 60, 70, 80, 90, and then you get to 100, then you go 200, 300, 400. And then if they wanted to go beyond, one of the things that they could do, and we don't see the mathematics play out like we see in ours, but it was still a base 10 system. And of course, the mathematical use of numbers was something that was built into humans by God anyway. So, and the system of that base 10 system, if you will, was then the basis of their numbering and of their calculations and such. But they could also do something where, since letters could stand for numbers, and as she just showed you, they could write it out. And if they wanted to say that there were, let's say 10,000, and you have to stop and think, they weren't interested in counting tremendous numbers in the early days. Apparently, we don't have any indication of that. And so, but if you wanted to say 100 hundreds, that would be 100 hundreds. Well, that's 10,000. And you could say you had ma'ath, and then you could say 100 of hundreds, and that would be a 10,000 number. And it's much like what you have there when you have Shaloshet Elafim. You'd have 3 of thousands, if you will. And they could say it 3,000s, or they could say it 3 of thousands, either way. So they did both in the construct form and in absolute numbering. So typically they wrote them out. Does that answer it somewhat?
Good. All right.
I don't know how they did calculus. I don't know what their symbol was for differentials and things. I'm persuaded we have invented a lot of, through the years, we've invented a lot of symbols to represent what we could see mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
So
what you're saying is they didn't use the Greek letter P to represent 3.16.
3.15, 3.14 something ad infinitum. No, they didn't do that. What's interesting is that when we see those things, that relationship had been built into the geometries and the trigonometries, as we call them. That was already built in, and men had to look to see it. That's why when we say 3 1/7
mm-hmm.
for pi, oh, I'm sorry, p, but it was then, but 3 1/7 is it's not the exact. So that's why they have now calculated it down to, I don't even know how many decimal places, and it becomes very important when you're shooting rockets into space and things like that, and most other things, the distances aren't that crucial. Or if you're down in the angstroms and looking at the distance between the hydrogen and oxygen atoms on a water molecule, which is an interesting thing, and the angles of the between the hydrogens on a water molecule. So I don't think Abraham was concerned about the angle between the hydrogens on a molecule of water.
No.
I just interesting thoughts though. Maybe what we could do, maybe we could, this would be something be good for a graduate student to work on, and maybe we could get Robert and Jamie to work as a husband-wife team to do this research.
That sounds like a good idea.
Oh my.
All right.
And by the way, Robert, you're right. All of this was always in God's mind before creation came into existence. He built it, and then that's why we say we discovered this and we discovered that. Well, it was never covered. I don't know why we discovered that which was not covered. It's just that we weren't able to think sufficiently in detail as God built the system, and it took us a while to get approximations. And I still am amazed by numbers, so I'm going to be quiet, Becca.
It's all right.
I got to go open some documents.
All right. So we have been taking a look at Genesis chapter 11 and working now here with verse 4. And so just coming back up here to the English text, just as kind of a refresher about what it is that we're looking at. So you have then descendants of Noah, they're journeying from the east, and then they settled in this valley in the land of Shinar. And then they decide to make bricks and stones. And then what is it that they are going to do with these bricks? And that's where we come down here to verse 4. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Now, one of the things that I do want to bring out here before we get into the Hebrew text is you will notice that there are some italicized words in this particular verse, namely that idea of may reach. And so because those words are italicized, that is indicative that those words were not present in the Hebrew text. And so thus, literally, what we will see when we get down into the text is it's more like whose top unto heaven. Now, the reason that I bring that out is there are a lot of interesting depictions of the Tower of Babel in art that has been made available to us, where they will picture this very tall tower reaching all the way up beyond the clouds. As we will see, those pictures are not accurate to what the text of Scripture was saying. In actuality, so it's not that there's this whole big towering building that's reaching up beyond the clouds. So that's not what the...
And all of those pictures have served as misrepresentations of Scripture always do. All of those pictures have served to mislead people with respect to what actually happened at Babel. And they got their, and think about it, the focus of people, and I heard this from a child, the focus of people became this tower. So we even say, well, a Tower of Babel. It's not about the Tower of Babel. It was always about the rebellion at Babel. That was the issue, and the mixing of the languages. But Becca, right, you pointing that out, see, this takes, when you go to the Hebrew text like you're doing, this takes out of the equation of thought this idea of a tower that was this long stringy thing that was up beyond the clouds, thousands of feet high. And see, that absurdity of representation did exactly what all absurdity of representation does. It misled people, and the people who believed are even misled, and the ones who did not believe said this is nonsense. This whole Bible is nonsense. And see, this is what misrepresentation of what God actually said has done, and it always does. It always leads to destruction. Always. Cannot do otherwise. So.
So we'll see that when we get on down here into the Hebrew text, but I did want to bring that up about those italicized words. So having seen that, let's come on down to the Hebrew text and see what's going on. So thus, verse 4, and you'll notice that our very first word is Vayomeru. Now, right on the front of that, you can see that wow with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte. So we know what that is. We know that there is going to be that wow consecutive. And so it joins this particular verb to what came before it, and it indicates a continuation of the account here. The dagesh forte for the wow consecutive is going to go inside of the imperfect performative. In this case, we have the yod. And as we've seen, there are 4 imperfect performatives: the aleph, the yod, the tau, and the nun, where the aleph indicates that the subject is first common singular. The nun indicates that the subject is first common plural. The yod indicates that the subject is either third masculine singular or plural, and the tau is the catch-all indicating that the subject is could be anything else. So it could be second masculine singular or plural, second feminine singular or plural, or third feminine singular or plural. In this instance, we're looking at the yod, so we know then that we're looking at third masculine singular or plural. To determine the number, I look to the end of the verb to see if there is a U-class vowel. We do indeed have a U-class vowel here, the shurik, the long U. So I know this is going to be plural. And you will see then, for that reason, I've translated this as then they. And then the rest of that translation there comes from the triliteral root here, the aleph, mem, resh. And that aleph, mem, resh, amar, indicates the idea of to say. And so thus we would say, then they said, because that while consecutive is going to flip the aspect of the verb. So then they said, well, what is it that they said? Well, basically, it's the rest of the verse here. So first of all, the first word that they say here is hava. We have seen this particular word before. This is, in fact, going to be an imperative form of the verb yahav, or yahav rather. And so thus taking the verb yahav, and remember how it is that we form the imperative. We take the second person imperfect forms, and then we remove the imperfect performative. So in this case, because we're dealing with a second masculine singular, I'm going to go ahead and use the tau imperfect performative here. And ordinarily, we would point this with a hieroc, and then there would as well be this holum. So we would say tihov. Well, notice as well, the yod here is going to be vowelless, so it will have that silent schwa underneath it. Well, because of the fact that it is vowelless and that the hieroc, the vowel preceding it, is very close in pronunciation with the yod, they are very similar in sounds. So the hieroc here is going to join together with the hieroc yod in order to form a single sound, and thus we would get tihov. Well, the interesting thing is, what will happen is that long I will in fact change to the long E. There is a relationship between a long I, that E sound, and a long E, the A sound. And under the influence of that change, then we're also going to end up with an A class of vowel underneath the hey. Now, in order to form the imperative being formed off of the imperfect, I'm going to remove the imperfect performative, and that leaves this idea of have. And then, as you can see what they've done here, they've added an ah ending at the end of it. And what that does is it just intensifies the imperative in a way, just like what we see with the cohortative, sort of adds a little bit of that emphasis to it. So come, do this type idea. And then underneath the influence of the addition of that ah, then that a vowel changes, lengthens to that kamates. And so thus that's how we get this form here, hava, this idea of give. So in other words, what they're saying to one another is give of your strength, give of your resources, give of your abilities to this task that we are getting ready to do. And what is the nature of this task? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question because we get that answer here in the following clause. Nivne lanu ir u mikdal. And so this word here, nivne, that is another verb. It is formed off of the triliteral root bana, which has the idea of to build. But you can see what has happened is, you see that letter right there, that noon? That is this letter right there. We have another one of our imperfect performatives, except in this instance, it is going to be the first common plural. And so underneath the influence of that, the Baith is now closing the syllable, and then under the influence of the hey there at the end, we have a slight change in pointing there as well. And so nivne, bana having the idea of to build, so we would say then we will build. And then next is lanu. And lanu is the lamed preposition with the anu first common plural pronominal suffix. And so we would say to us. So we will build to us. We will build for us. In other words, we will build for ourselves. And what is it that we're going to build? Ir. Well, Ir, that's the word for city. So we will build to us or for ourselves a city, u mikdal. And you can see on the front here, we've got that conjunction. That's the form that the conjunction takes before one of those letters that are pronounced with the lips. And so basically the Beth Mem Pe. And so there's their conjunction. And this is on the word Migdal, which is the idea of a tower. Now, the interesting thing is here as well, the word Migdal actually is, actually comes from the word Gadal. And Gadal has the idea of to be great. And what they've done, and this is not at all unusual in Hebrew, is they have taken a mem, they've added it to the front of a verb, and in so doing, they've made a noun. And so thus they've taken this idea of to be great, and then they've added a mem to the front of it, and we've got no longer a verb, we've got a noun that is a great thing. And you think about towers. Well, towers would be higher than any other building around them. And so as a result, they would be a great building. And so that's why then this particular triliteral root of Gadal can be applied to the idea of a tower. And so thus we have Migdal. So we have then, give of yourselves, give of your resources. We will build for ourselves a city and a tower. And then we're going to get a little bit more information about this particular tower. And you can see, Wirosho Bashamayim. And so again, here you can see we have the conjunction. And on the word Rosh being basically the idea of head. And then we have the O, which is going to be that third masculine singular pronominal suffix. So, and the head of him, the him here referring back to the tower. So the head of the tower, Bashamayim. You can see the Baith preposition there. You can also see the Pathak followed by the Dagesh forte, which is indicative of the fact that the article has dropped out. What we had was this word, Shemayim, that is heaven, and then the article, the, was placed on the front, hey, with the Pathak followed by a Dagesh forte, and then we add the Baith preposition onto it. Well, underneath the influence of the addition of the preposition, the hey of the article, being a weak sound, drops out. And as a result, then, the Pathak of the article is left an orphan, and so thus what does the preposition do? The preposition adopts it. And so that then is how we get the form Ba Shemayim there, in the heavens. Now, the interesting thing is here, Bashamayim is going to be a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrases are most frequently adverbial, which means then that this prep phrase is going to be modifying a verb. But as you can see, I don't have any verb here in this clause, at least not expressed. That tells me then that there is going to be an elided verb, and the most commonly elided verb is a verb of existence. And so thus I'm just going to go ahead and put this here for right now. No, we'll make it future because we are dealing with a future idea. So thus will exist. So in other words, and the head of him, the head of the tower, will exist in the heavens. Well, basically what that is indicating is that the tower is going to be taller than the other buildings that are around it. And so that would be that indication there. Yeah, I think that's as far as we'll go with that one for right now. So it does not say that, oh, the tower was existing all the way beyond the clouds, but what it is indicating is that this is something that would be taller than any of the other buildings around it. So thus, it is a great thing whose head would exist in the heavens. And then, well, now we come into the motivation behind this building. Why is it that they are wanting to build this particular tower? Why is it that they're wanting to build this particular city? And it is that motivation that then will explain to us why it is that what was happening here at Babel was not right in the sight of God. So notice here, as we get into this, W'ne'aseh lanu shem, pen nafutz al pnei kol haaretz. So right here, this very first word, W'ne'aseh, and you can see again, I've got my conjunction there. I've got the noon, which is going to be another imperfect performative, and the noon is going to be that first common plural idea. And then I've got my triliteral root, the ayin, sin, hey. This is from the triliteral root asa, meaning to do or to make. And so thus we have the translation then, and we will make lanu. Well, there it is, that same word that we saw up here, that lamed preposition with the first common plural pronominal suffix. So, and we will make to us shame. Well, shame is the idea of name. So, and we will make to us for ourselves a name. Okay? And then, why is it that we're wanting to make for ourselves a name? Pen nafutz al penei kol haaretz. And this idea of pen, if you looked it up in Bible Works, you would see that it's that idea of lest, we would say. But it actually comes from the word related to face, as you can see it here, penei. And so thus I've translated it facing. So in other words, what we see here, the reason that they're wanting to do this, to build these things, to make a name for themselves, is in order to prevent the action of this next clause from occurring. Well, what is that action? Nafutz. Notice here again, I've got my first common plural imperfect performative there on the verb putz, which is basically the idea of scatter. So lest we will scatter. Al, that's the preposition upon. Pene, this is going to be the construct form here. So faces of pane. So, well, faces of what? Kol. Well, that's that idea of entirety, and it says well in the construct, and then we have haaretz. And you can see the word eretz right there with the hey article. So upon the faces of the entirety of the earth. So the reason then that these individuals are wanting to build this city and this tower is for the purpose of making a name for themselves. In other words, in order to make themselves to appear great. Why do they want themselves to be great? Because they do not want to be scattered upon the faces of the earth. Well, let's go back just a moment here, and especially coming on back to Genesis chapter 9. So this is after the flood, and Noah and his 3 sons have just come off of the ark, and now the Lord is speaking to Noah and his sons. And God blessed Noah and his 3 sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, and every moving thing, but eat not. And you can see then here, and you be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And you can see basically, especially here from verse 7 and verse 1, the Lord's commandment to, the Lord's design for the existence of Noah and his 3 sons was the same as his design had been for Adam and Eve back there in the garden, for them to multiply, to become many, and to fill the earth. In other words, in order to fill the earth, then they would have to separate from one another. But what we see here in this idea of verse 4 is these individuals are saying, we do not want to go throughout the earth and be separated from one another. We want to stay together. So, in other words, the Lord had said, fill the earth, and they're saying, no, we don't want to do that. That demonstrates then that these individuals were in fact in rebellion against the design of God. And that was the issue. The issue was not that they were building the city and building the tower. The issue was that their hearts were in rebellion against God, especially against his design criteria that they were to disperse and fill the earth. And so what we see then as we go through the rest of this is the Lord is going to demonstrate to them that one, that they were in fact in rebellion against him, and two, that their rebellion against him does not change his design for their existence, just as Adam's violation did not alter God's design for Adam's existence either. And so that is one of those things that we're going to see. And so the mixing of language that we're going to see as we go down through this was in fact it was a perfect way to get the people to disperse, because what do we now do when we encounter someone who speaks a different language from us? We have a tendency to separate from that person to interact with those that we can communicate with. And so language has that effect then, right? And so